It started with a quick, sharp jab. Not just any jab, but one thrown with too much power, too much intent, especially for a sparring session. The young boxer, all muscle and raw ambition, caught Muhammad Ali clean on the cheek. There was a sound, a kind of muffled thud, that cut through the usual gym noise. It wasn't a knockout punch, but it was definitely meant to sting, to make a statement. Ali's head snapped back a little, a flicker of surprise in his eyes that quickly vanished. The young boxer didn't stop there. He pulled back, a smirk spreading across his face, and then he said it. His voice, loud and clear in the sudden quiet of the gym, carried a cocky edge. "Looks like someone needs a lesson in respect, old man." The words hung in the air, heavy and disrespectful. It was a challenge, a taunt, thrown at the greatest boxer of all time, in front of everyone. You could feel the tension instantly, a collective holding of breath from the few people watching. Instead of exploding, instead of a furious comeback, Ali did something unexpected. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, looking at the young boxer, and then, slowly, a calm, almost serene smile touched his lips. It wasn't a kind smile, exactly, but it wasn't angry either. It was the kind of smile that made you wonder what was going on behind those eyes, a smile that seemed to know something the rest of us didn't. It was unnerving, more so than any shout or glare could have been. The young boxer, for a split second, looked a little thrown off by it, like he'd expected a different reaction. He still felt a rush, though, a small, fleeting sense of triumph. He'd landed a shot, he'd talked trash, and Ali hadn't come back at him with fury. He probably thought he'd gotten under Ali's skin, maybe even intimidated him a little. He had no idea what was coming next. The only hint of the shift, the only sign that things were about to change in a big way, was a subtle tightening of Ali's jaw. Just a tiny clench, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Some lessons are best learned in the ring. Ali's eyes narrowed slightly, just enough to catch the light differently, to make them seem a little colder, a little more focused. It wasn't a look of anger, but something deeper, something that promised a reckoning. It was an unspoken promise, a silent declaration that the game had just changed. The young boxer, still riding his wave of arrogance, probably didn't even notice. But anyone who knew Ali, anyone who had seen him in the ring, would have recognized that look. It was the look of a man who was about to teach a very hard, very unforgettable lesson. It left everyone, including the young boxer, wondering exactly what was going to happen next. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The 1960s in the United States were a whirlwind of change, a time when old ways clashed with new ideas, and the fight for civil rights was at its peak. This was the backdrop for boxing, a sport that mirrored the country's raw energy and struggles. Boxing gyms back then were different. They weren't fancy, clean places. They were usually in run-down parts of cities, smelling of sweat, old leather, and sometimes cigar smoke. The air was thick with the sound of heavy bags thudding, ropes jumping, and the grunts of men pushing themselves to their limits. These gyms were a refuge, a tough school, and a ladder out of poverty for many young men. Our young boxer, let's call him Kid, grew up in one of those neighborhoods, a place where opportunities were scarce, and the streets often led to trouble. Boxing wasn't just a sport for him. It was his ticket, his way to make something of himself, to earn respect. His family, especially his mother and younger siblings, had pinned all their hopes on him. They saw his quick hands and his fierce determination as their collective chance for a better life. Every punch he threw in the gym, every round he sparred, carried the weight of their dreams. He felt that pressure, and it fueled him, but it also made him fiercely independent, sometimes too much so. Muhammad Ali, on the other hand, was already a giant. He wasn't just a boxer, he was a phenomenon. His style in the ring was unlike anything anyone had seen. The float like a butterfly, sting like a bee philosophy. He was fast, agile, and his punches were deadly accurate. But Ali's impact went far beyond the ropes. In the 60s, he was a symbol, especially for the African American community during the Civil Rights Movement. His charisma, his refusal to be silenced, his stand against the Vietnam War, all of it made him more than an athlete. He was a voice, a movement, a legend in his own time. Kids like Kid looked up to him, but also saw him as the ultimate challenge. Kid respected Ali, of course. How could he not? Ali was the greatest. But that respect was mixed with a burning ambition. Kid saw Ali not just as an idol, but as a target. In his young, hungry mind, beating Ali, even in a sparring session, would be the fastest way to his own fame, his own legacy. He believed his youth, his raw power, and his relentless drive could overcome Ali's experience, even his legendary status. He saw Ali's age, though still in his prime, as a weakness he could exploit. This wasn't about hatred. It was about a desperate need to climb to the top, and Ali was standing there, the highest peak. This mindset led to small moments of tension long before that fateful jab. Kid would often boast a little too loudly in the gym, talking about how he was the future, how he was going to shake up the boxing world. Sometimes, when Ali would offer a piece of advice, a quiet word about footwork or timing, Kid would dismiss it with a shrug, or a confident, "I got this, champ." He saw Ali's wisdom as old school, not relevant to his own explosive style. He believed his way was better, faster. These were small things, easy to overlook in the noisy chaos of a boxing gym, but they were clear signs of a deeper disrespect, a growing overconfidence that was setting the stage for their inevitable clash in the ring. He was building up to something, and everyone who noticed knew it wouldn't end quietly. Kid's journey to this moment wasn't a sudden turn. It was a path paved with relentless ambition, where the pursuit of greatness often overshadowed the need for humility. From a young age, he had been a standout, faster and stronger than most kids his age. This natural talent, while a blessing, also fostered a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. He remembered early sparring sessions, back when he was just starting out, where older, more experienced fighters would sometimes catch him with a clean shot or outmaneuver him with subtle shifts. These were moments that should have taught him caution, but he'd always found a way to spin them, to blame a bad angle or a lucky punch. The lessons never quite stuck. He'd brush off advice from coaches too, especially if it didn't immediately make sense to his own instincts. He was quick to learn, but slow to truly listen. He had made promises when he first started boxing, to his grandmother, to his mentor, even to himself. Promises about staying grounded, about remembering where he came from, about using his gift for good. But as the wins piled up, as the roar of the crowd grew louder, the allure of fame and the whispers of his own ego started to drown out those promises. He started to believe the hype, to see himself as untouchable, destined for something bigger than everyone else. The simple, honest joy of boxing began to twist into something more self-serving. His growing ego started showing itself in more obvious ways. He'd dismiss sparring partners with a casual wave of his hand if they didn't push him hard enough, or if they dared to land a clean shot. He'd showboat excessively during training, making a spectacle of simple drills, always playing to the invisible crowd in his head. Trainers, men who had dedicated their lives to the sport, would try to pull him aside, to talk sense into him, to remind him that even the greatest champions showed respect. But Kid would just nod, a thin smile on his face, his eyes already wandering, already thinking about his next big move. He believed he was above their simple lessons, that his talent transcended their old-fashioned wisdom. There was a particular incident during a training camp, months before the Ali sparring session. He was working with a younger, less experienced fighter, someone who looked up to him. Kid was supposed to be guiding him, but instead he used the session to prove a point, hitting the kid harder than necessary, making him look foolish in front of everyone. The younger fighter left the ring with tears in his eyes, and a quiet coach had to step in, telling Kid that true strength wasn't about breaking others down, but about lifting them up. Kid just scoffed, muttering something about needing to be tough to make it in this game. He saw it as a sign of weakness in the other kid, not a flaw in his own character. These episodes created a pattern, a slow, emotional wear on those around him. His arrogance during that sparring session with Muhammad Ali wasn't a sudden outburst. It was the natural culmination of a long-standing behavior, a deeply ingrained pattern of disrespect and overconfidence. His environment, the constant praise, the hunger for success, and his own internal struggles all fed this monster. He was a product of his circumstances, yes, but also a prisoner of his own making, believing his own myth more than the hard truths of the sport. The stage was set, not just for a boxing match, but for a reckoning that had been building inside him for years. The tension in the gym was thick, almost a physical thing you could touch. The young boxer's confidence, already sky high, swelled even more after a string of easy wins. He'd knocked out a few local contenders, impressive KOs that made the headlines in the small sports sections. His entourage, a mix of old friends and new hangers-on, always had a new compliment ready, feeding his ego with every word. They saw his quick rise as proof of his genius, ignoring any red flags. His trainers, older men who had seen their share of rising stars and burnt-out talents, tried to talk to him. They'd bring up his showboating, or how he sometimes ignored their instructions in the heat of the moment. "Kid, you gotta stay humble," one of them would say, wiping sweat from his brow. "Talent's good, but discipline wins championships." The young boxer would nod, a faint smile playing on his lips, already thinking about his next fight, his next victory. He'd agree, but the words never really sank in. He saw their concerns as old-fashioned worries, not real advice for someone like him, someone who was clearly destined for greatness. The pressure from his community was a heavy cloak, adding to his internal burden. Everyone back home was counting on him to make it big, to bring glory and money back to their neighborhood. His family, understandably proud, reinforced his ego without meaning to. Every phone call was filled with praise, every visit a celebration of his latest achievement. They saw him as their shining star, their only hope for a better life. When he walked through his old neighborhood, neighbors and local fans would whisper, their eyes following him. Some looked at him with admiration, others with a hint of judgment about his growing swagger. The way he carried himself now, shoulders back, chin up, almost daring anyone to challenge him. He felt the weight of all these expectations, but he misread them. He saw them not as a burden, but as validation, proof that he was right to believe in himself so strongly. He became increasingly convinced that he could challenge anyone, that his youth and raw power would be enough to overcome even the most seasoned fighter, even Muhammad Ali. The gym itself seemed to hum with this unspoken energy. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of sweat, old leather, and liniment. Outside, the distant roar of city traffic was a constant background noise, a reminder of the bustling world just beyond these walls. Inside, it was a different kind of world, one defined by the rhythmic thud of punches landing on heavy bags, the sharp crack of speed bags, the grunts and shouts of other boxers training. Every sound, every smell, every bead of sweat seemed to contribute to the intense, almost claustrophobic atmosphere. It was all building up to this moment, to the sparring session that everyone knew was going to be more than just practice. The air felt charged, pregnant with the promise of confrontation. The young boxer, oblivious to any potential danger, walked into that ring, his head held high, completely ready for his moment. He truly believed he was about to prove something, not just to Ali, but to the entire world. The sparring session began. The young boxer, still riding high from his earlier disrespectful jab, kept up his aggressive style. He moved fast, throwing quick combinations, trying to catch Ali off guard again. He believed he had the upper hand, that his speed and youth were too much for the older champion. He even let out a few grunts and small taunts between punches, trying to get under Ali's skin. He wanted to prove his point, to show everyone in the gym that he was the future, and Ali was the past. Ali, who had initially maintained that calm demeanor, the one that had surprised everyone just moments before, suddenly shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, no sudden explosion of anger, but something deeper, more fundamental. His movements became sharper, more purposeful. His eyes, which had been almost relaxed, now held an intense, focused gaze. It wasn't anger, not the kind that makes you lose control, but a cold, calculated determination. It was the look of a master about to give a lesson, and the lesson began. Ali didn't rush. He started to systematically take apart the young boxer's game. Each punch he threw was precise, a surgeon's touch, not meant to knock out, but to expose. He moved with an almost supernatural grace, a dance in the ring that made the young boxer look clumsy and slow. Ali's famous footwork, the Ali shuffle, was on full display. He'd glide in, land a quick jab, and then float away before the young boxer could even react. The young boxer found himself swinging at air, hitting nothing but frustration. Ali made him miss and miss again, making him waste energy with every wild punch. The young boxer, initially defiant, his face still holding that arrogant smirk, slowly began to change. The smirk faded. His taunts turned into grunts of frustration, then to labored breathing, and finally, to silence. He was starting to understand. The gap between his skill and Ali's mastery wasn't just wide. It was a chasm. Every time he thought he had an opening, Ali was already gone, or a quick counterpunch would snap his head back. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make him think. He was being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, outclassed. He wasn't connecting, and Ali was. It wasn't just about boxing moves anymore. It was about something deeper. It was about humility, about respect, and about the true meaning of greatness. Ali's performance was exposing the young boxer's superficial understanding of the sport, his reliance on raw talent, and an inflated ego. He had believed that youth and power were enough, but Ali was showing him that true greatness was built on skill, discipline, and a deep understanding of the craft. The young boxer looked into Ali's eyes across the ring, and for the first time, he saw not just a man, but a legend. He realized he wasn't just fighting another boxer. He was fighting history, fighting an icon. And he was losing, not just the round, but his entire belief system, his confidence, which had been so unwavering, was now cracking under the weight of Ali's silent, masterful demonstration. Every missed punch, every perfectly landed jab from Ali chipped away at his self-importance. The air in the gym, once thick with his own bravado, now felt heavy with his dawning realization. He was being taught a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. The bell finally rang, a sharp, merciful sound that cut through the humid air of the gym. The young boxer stood there, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. Not from exertion alone, but from a profound internal shift. He hadn't been knocked down, hadn't even taken a truly damaging blow, but he felt utterly defeated. The earlier disrespectful jab, the one that had started this whole thing, now felt like a childish mistake, a pebble thrown at a mountain. His bravado had vanished, replaced by a deep, humbling emptiness. Ali, on the other hand, looked almost untouched. He moved with the same casual grace he had at the beginning, a slight sheen of sweat, his only concession to the effort. He walked over to the young boxer, not with a look of triumph, but with something akin to pity mixed with understanding. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder, a gesture that was both firm and comforting. "Son," Ali said, his voice calm, "you got heart. But heart ain't enough if you don't got respect for the game and for yourself." He paused, his eyes holding the young boxer's gaze. "You got fast hands, but you gotta learn to use your head too. And you gotta learn when to listen." It wasn't a scolding, but a quiet piece of wisdom, offered without judgment. Ali then turned and walked to his corner, leaving the young boxer standing in the middle of the ring, alone with his thoughts. Around the gym, other boxers, trainers, and onlookers who had witnessed the silent lesson offered quiet nods. Some looks held pity for the young man's public humbling, others empathy, remembering their own moments of foolish pride. His own trainers, who had seen his arrogance growing, approached him slowly. They didn't need to say much. Their sober expressions and the quiet way they helped him remove his gloves spoke volumes. There was no, "I told you so," just a shared understanding of the hard truth that had just been laid bare. The young boxer's hubris was completely shattered. The dream of instantly surpassing Ali, of using him as a stepping stone to his own fame, had evaporated like mist. It was replaced by the stark reality of his own shortcomings, not just in skill, but in character. He had come in believing he was a king, and Ali had shown him he was barely a prince, still learning to walk. This wasn't a traditional victory for Ali, but it was an emotional one, a profound teaching moment delivered with fists and footwork rather than words. The young boxer had gained an invaluable lesson, a brutal but necessary one, in humility and respect. He realized then that true greatness came from dedication, from ceaseless effort, and from a deep, abiding respect for the sport and everyone in it, not just from raw talent or a loud mouth. Later that evening, alone in his small apartment, the young boxer sat in silence. The gym lights, the cheers, the smell of liniment, all seemed a world away. He replayed the sparring session in his mind, every missed punch, every precise counter from Ali. He saw his own past arrogance, his dismissive attitude towards others, his hunger for fame eclipsing his love for the craft. The brokenness he felt wasn't physical. It was a deep, emotional wound that cut through his ego. But within that brokenness, a seed of something new began to sprout. He saw a future path, not one paved with instant glory, but with genuine effort, with listening, with learning, and most importantly, with respect. He understood that this humiliation was, in fact, the most important lesson of his life, a turning point that would redefine his journey. True legends, he realized, don't just win fights. They inspire growth and teach profound lessons that echo far beyond the ropes of the ring.